we welcome Reverend Greg Chute to our pulpit, which he occupied for 14 years, again, beginning in the last century. We're very happy to have him back today. We welcome him into our refurbished McKinnon Hall, which looks very different from what it was when you were here.
What a pleasure to see all these familiar faces and new faces. It's wonderful to see the new ceiling, looks great, and the nice painted walls. Very pleasure to be here. Mary and I were actually in Ireland when Marie texted me and asked me if I could come and do this, and we immediately said yes, so it's a pleasure to be here. Let's take a moment to just close our eyes and take a few deep breaths and bring ourselves completely into the presence of this moment, to open our hearts and our minds to this community, to open our sense of spirit to this spiritual and sacred space, to allow ourselves to set aside all the things that call us each and every day throughout the week, those long lists of things to be done at home and at work, with our family and our friends, and to be able to focus our minds and our spirit here in this time and space together. Let us take just a moment of silence to center ourselves here. Good morning. I want to talk about existentialism today. Excuse me. When I was in college, I took a course in philosophy. Actually, I took two courses in philosophy, one classic and one contemporary. And I remember getting to the part on existentialism and not having a clue as to what they were talking about. And I decided I was not going to be a philosopher. The thing that I learned out of philosophy is that they try to use as large words as possible and as circular as rationale as possible, and continually left me far behind. So I put it off for a long time. But when I went to seminary, ironically, at 42, I took a philosophy course, and the professor started off with talking about Soren Kierkegaard. And my sense of existentialism really kind of grew out of the French existentialists, Camus and Sartre. And I wasn't aware that Kierkegaard really invented the term. And I was really, really taken with his whole approach. And all of a sudden I understood existentialism. If you didn't read the blurb that was in the newsletter, I'm going to just take a moment to reread it. And Soren Kierkegaard was Danish. He lived from 1813 to 1855, so not very long. But in one of his journals, he wrote in 1835, "How did I get into this world? Why was I not asked about it, and why was I not informed of the rules and regulations, but just thrust into the ranks as if I had been bought and by a peddling Shanghaier of human beings? How did I get involved in this big enterprise called actuality? Why should I be involved? Isn't it a matter of choice? And if I am compelled to be involved, where's the manager? I have something to say about this. Is there no manager? To whom shall I make my complaints?" This is from a very strict Lutheran Christian who had grown up with in a very strict family, had gone to university to study theology, and was preparing for the ministry. But when he got there, he experienced a crisis of faith, and he began to question this existence that he found himself immersed in this time, in this place with very little understanding about who he was and how he could make sense of it and how he was to be in this world. And he wrote, "Life is not a problem to be solved, but a reality to be experienced." And so he took a objection with classical philosophy, which tends to look at how we know things. What is true? What is moral? What is ethical? What is just? And those kinds of problems that the philosophers tend to explore. And he said, no, life is more basic than that. The problem is I exist. Period. It's that simple. The problem is here I am, and I have no clue what to do, what to think, how to be, and so I have to create the reality that I will live out my life. And the problem is that we exist, so now what? And he realized that he has tremendous freedom with that understanding. There isn't anything that he has to be limited by. There are no rules and regulations, and that he has the responsibility to create his own structure and his own life. And he did a very interesting thing. He decided to be a Christian. Now, it's an interesting thing, and if you ever read, and I'm not advocating you read any of Kierkegaard, but in Truth and in Fear and Trembling, he writes about confronting God with his questions and confronting God with this dilemma and this anxiety about who to be and how to be. And he realizes that Christianity gives him a structure that he can accept and he can live with. And so he decides that he's going to be a Christian. And then he goes on after that, for many years after that, to really criticize Christianity, especially the clergy and the church, the organization, as not being authentic to the basic meanings and directions of Christianity, but to be more concerned with the layers in society and culture. But the fascinating thing about him is he admits, I don't know if this is true. But that doesn't matter. The truth of this is irrelevant because I am going to, and he coined the phrase, take a leap of faith. I am going to accept that it is true because it gives me meaning, purpose, direction, and a structure in my life. The validity of it is irrelevant in many ways, but it is who I am going to be and is the way I am going to live my life. Now, as a Unitarian and Universalist, I can really, really, really relate with that. That he's made a choice and he understands that it may or may not be true, but it gives him some structure. And the reason I relate with it is because over the years, I've met so many Unitarians and Universalists who love the freedom that we have when we come here, not being told anything. Everybody here is free to make their own choice about whatever they want to do. That's great, freedom from. The problem is that many of us, and I don't want to look at anyone, don't accept the responsibility to. We don't actually make a choice. We don't actually decide what it is we believe. That's the hard part. And we don't actually decide who we're going to be and how we're going to be. Because he goes on to say that the essence then of solving the problem of existing, the essence of existentialism is authenticity and commitment. We have to be who we are, and we have to make a commitment to being who we are. This whole idea about holding all of our options open at all times really doesn't give us any answer to the problem of existing. It really doesn't give us a way to be, a way to think,
a way to act in our world, because we exist and we have to act. We have to do something. The problem is that, he writes, the thing is to find a truth which is true for me, and to find the idea for which I can live and die. What is my truth? What is your truth? Because they're not the same necessarily. They don't have to be the same. And tell you the truth, they better not be the same. Because mine's really, really good. And the problem with existentialism, however, is that it got, I'm going to say, kidnapped by the French, who focused on the notion that it's true that there is no meaning in life. And Camus and Sartre went on to express meaninglessness and the absurdity of life. And instead of saying, be authentic and make a commitment, they said there is no purpose and there is no meaning. We'll get to you. You're disagreeing with me, obviously. Or maybe we won't get to you. So Kierkegaard had agreed that there is meaninglessness, but we have to make meaning. We have to create meaning. Now, many of you have probably heard of Viktor Frankl. Viktor Frankl is a Holocaust survivor, and he developed a whole theory of logotherapy in talking with survivors of the concentration camps. And he said that the thing that he discovered is that the survivors, people who could deal with the terror and the horror of the camps, were people who had meaning, who had created meaning, even in that darkest time and place. They were able to create a meaning that gave their life purpose and direction, even in horrible circumstances. And he didn't find that there was any common meaning or common purpose, but they just had to have their own individual, authentic reality that gave them some kind of purpose in moving forward and surviving. So that's it, essentially, existentialism. The problem is, here we are. Now what? And I want to touch on one other thing, because this isn't all about religion. Many of you have probably heard of William James. William James and John Dewey came along with a thing called pragmatism. And pragmatism, in a lot of ways, is a secular expression of existentialism. Pragmatism essentially says, you make an assumption about the truth of something. Whether it's true or not, you make an assumption about it, because based on the consequences of that assumption, and then you act as though it's true. The best example I can come up with is college football. It's fourth down, you're behind by 4 points, you're at the 50-yard line, and it's fourth down and 50 yards to go. It is highly impractical to stand back there and throw the ball 50 yards and Hail Mary, pray that somebody's going to catch it. It's not practical. But it's the only possible thing you can do that has any chance of being successful. So you do it, right? But you don't know, okay. Well, ask a significant other, yeah. So it's not about practicality, but it's about the pragmatic approach. You make an assumption that is going to be the best possible consequences under those circumstances. And that's essentially existentialism as I understand it. So what I'd like to do now is to hear some feedback, some your opinions. As you've been listening, you've been, some people nodding, some people not. Things that you agree with, disagree with, or where your mind has gone in your own life about existentialism. I've done this service several times, and I've had many, many people come up to me afterwards and said, I didn't know I was an existentialist. But I think inherently most all of us are. We just didn't know it. So,
Okay.
thanks.
This brings back fond memories. As a freshman in college, I took a class and it was existentialism for God. We know we exist, but the course I took was the problem of God. Does he exist? And that was the focus of that course. And I thought that was interesting because if God exists for you, he provides a purpose for you.
Well, and Camus and Sartre went on to say that this is not just nope. I can't give up that kind of control. Yes, it really doesn't have anything to do with God, really. I mean, it could be applied to that. That's a great example.
Hey, Greg. This is just like old times. I love it. All right, here's my question. So we are all living by our own individual realities. So essentially, everybody's reality is an illusion. It's what you have created around you. How then, and so that means there is no ultimate reality, there really is no ultimate truth if everybody is living by their own reality. How then do we all come together with all of these different illusions and realities in community to find some kind of common truth?
That's a great question, Liz. And absolutely. The point is that's why I love Kierkegaard. He says, I don't know that Christianity is true. That's the key. We all have opinions, but it's when we say that ours is right and everybody else's is wrong is when we have a problem. But we can definitely be in community like I assume there are atheists and Christians and Buddhists and Wiccan all in this room. And that's okay, right? Because that's what we've chosen because it works for us. But we don't say that has to be the truth for you. That's the key. And it's when we have people who say, you're wrong and I'm right, that's when we have problems. And that's so hard to set aside. It's so hard to set aside because we're often threatened by other people's truth.
I have two questions. One is, it sounds like Kierkegaard started with the traditional tabula rasa, blank slate, etc. Didn't he have parents, and didn't they somehow educate him or screw him up or whatever? And the second question is, who do I complain to?
Liz. That's the problem. Absolutely, Fritz. Absolutely. Here.
Yes, well, the French existentialists were not totally nihilistic. It was not just, the starting point was the absurd, that seeing the war to end all wars that didn't, and seeing the Holocaust and the horrible destruction and suffering, many people said God is dead. And coming from the German side, Nietzsche had his ideas, and he was very nihilistic. But Camus especially was not nihilistic. He actually became quite hopeful, even though there is no one right meaning. That had not worked for Kierkegaard and so many other people in Europe. But he said in his final works, we can come together, we can agree to some common meaning and purpose. It isn't a God, it isn't the right way, but as Unitarian Universalists, we do come together. We do share, not dogma, but some beliefs, some principles of how we want to be in the world and how we want to be as a community. So we're not just, as Garrison Keillor said, Unitarians pray to whom it may concern. Maybe so, but when we get together in community, we have a presence at Newark Community Day. We write postcards. We create meaning, as Viktor Frankl said. We make meaning. And that is a little different from whatever.
Absolutely. I didn't mean to infer that they were nihilists. Absolutely, I agree. When I was in seminary, I had an ethics professor who he and I didn't agree on a lot of things, but he accused me of being a relativist, which basically means everything is relative, which it is, of course. And he said, so you're a nihilist in that you don't have any basic structure into your life. And I looked at him and I said, Dr. Stackhouse, you're a relativist too. And he got really offended. And he said, what do you mean? And I said, well, you've chosen to be a Christian. Fortunately, I was taking the course pass-fail.
Thank you. Julie Klinger. For me, it's really interesting to think about what these bodies of thought led to politically. I was thinking about, with Camus and the course of his life and his thought, and thinking about during that time, there were these watershed global political moments of consensus, like enshrined in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and things like this. And so what I find in that is like, okay, if the problem is existence, existence is also sacred in a way, or whatever the word may be, right? And so I think about then the tension that I feel with this is navigating between the live and let live and the setting firm boundaries when people are intentionally or unintentionally participating in things that undermine the conditions of existence for others. I'm just wondering how you deal with that.
No, isn't it in the American President when Michael Douglas says, how do you, to paraphrase it, how do you defend somebody who preaches something totally opposed to your way of thinking when your way of thinking is free thought and action? Do you remember that vaguely? That's a great line in there. It's a problem. How do I reconcile significant differences? Well, I think it gets back to what I had said earlier, that it all depends on the way that I am and this other person is in this interaction. If I respect the other person, but I'm not being respected in return, then that puts it on the interaction on a whole different level. And I don't know what that is. But one of the things that I've discovered over time, and I don't want to make this political, but we're on the brink of politicalizing everything. One of the things that I've discovered is that when I'm in a conversation with somebody that I disagree with, that I have to remain as compassionate and clear and authentic as I can be and remain engaged, because I'm not going to be able to change that person's mind. I know that. But everybody around me is watching what's going on. And those people are the ones that I can affect. May Sarton once said, we convert if we convert, not by demanding the impossible, but by being irresistible. I invite you to be irresistible.
And I take away from today's talk that what I want is authenticity and commitment and somebody to complain to in private.
Well, I hear Reverend Kim is available.
A little bit as a counter narrative, I take great pride in saying I don't know and not committing to a course, because there's as much harm done in saying I believe something and making that your meaning for life that is just not true. And we see it in cults all around us. I mean, we're living through a stage of that. So as kind of a counter narrative as a scientist, I think we need to be careful with what we choose to believe and commit to. And the power of saying, I don't know, and keeping the inquiry open is, I think, greatly underused.
Two things there. First of all, absolutely, I don't know works for everything. And when you make that choice, you've made a choice. I hate to tell you, but that's your choice. Did I see another hand? No. Are we done? Okay.